Hey everyone, welcome back to Tallulah Talks. That is me, and today it is Wednesday, which means we are back with Killer Wednesday. Apologies in advance for the bird. I unfortunately cannot do anything about that. However, let's get to who we are going to be talking about today. So today we are going to be talking about serial killer and serial rapist John Wayne Gacy. Now, of course, I have heard of him before. I didn't really know the extent of his crimes, and my boyfriend is absolutely obsessed with him. And someone had mentioned they would like John Wayne Gacy on Facebook, so I decided to do today's video on John Wayne Gacy. So let's first look into his background. So Gacy was raised in what was known as like a blue-collar middle-class home. He was born March 17th, 1942 in Chicago, Illinois. He was the son of Danish and Polish parents, and Gacy and his siblings unfortunately had to grow up with an alcoholic father. His father would often beat the children with a razor belt strap if he deemed any of their behaviour as inappropriate or misbehaviour. I'm not sure if their mother ever stood up for them or stood up to him. I'm not sure if she was abused by the dad. She never really came up much. The father would also physically abuse Gacy's mother. And his sister Karen later said that the siblings learned at that point to toughen up because of the physical abuse that they went through. Gacy's dad would often single him out and bully him by calling him names like dumb and being a sissy. Gacy was very close to his sisters and his mum, and at this time I don't believe he really had many friends. He mostly just hung out with his mum and his sisters. And after going to 4 different high schools, Gacy decided to drop out just before senior year. Again, I think he was bullied at school, so that's probably the reason why he did drop out. At this point, he cut off all contact with his family and decided to head to Las Vegas without any money whatsoever. After a couple of months, Gacy ran out of money, and he also lied about his age when he was applying for jobs as an ambulance driver at the Palm Memorial Park Hospital, I guess. The minimum age at this time was 21, and Gacy was obviously not that age. And when the staff learned of his real age, they did fire him. However, they did offer him a job in the morgue. He was then hired as a mortuary assistant. And it was his job to move corpses from the hospital to the mortuary. Unfortunately, he couldn't really afford rent with the pay at the time, so the director or manager of the morgue decided to let Gacy stay within the morgue. I'm not sure if he actually stayed in the actual morgue or if there was like a separate part to the morgue. I'm not entirely sure. At this time, this actually also caused speculation of necrophiliac tendencies due to the crimes that were discovered years later. Gacy was then shown how bodies were cleaned, treated and embalmed, and at night when Gacy was alone, he was known to pull out the drawers of the corpses, and he would then talk to the bodies as if they were real people. He would examine them and undress them and neatly folded their clothes as he went along. I guess he was maybe just a very lonely person, and he maybe kind of spoke to them in a way that he couldn't speak to a living person. This lasted until the director became suspicious that the bodies were being moved about, and he then called police. However, Gacy was not ID'd as a suspect. At this time, he began to save money for a return trip to Chicago, and he quit his job 3 months later. Without returning to high school, Gacy then enrolled and graduated from Northwestern Business College in 1963. He, at this time, also gained a management trainee position with a shoe company. This followed very shortly after graduation from his college, and in 1964, Gacy was transferred to Springfield, Illinois. At this time, he met his co-worker Marilyn Myers, and they were married September of that year. And at this time also, Gacy became very active in the local Springfield organisations, and this included the JCs, and he actually rose to the vice president of this group by 1965. Over the years, he also became involved in political activism, construction, and many other fields that he could work in. So he was quite motivated. However, there were some controversies at this point. So during his time with the JCs, Gacy offered extended hours to put in with the organisation. And this was in addition, because at this point he worked at his local KFC, and this was in addition to the 12 hours he was also doing at KFC. So he was very well liked and respected in this community. It was reported that Gacy and the JCs were very heavily involved in wife swapping, prostitution, porn, and drug use. I'm not sure if this has been proven, it's just this was reported. In August of 1967, Gacy unfortunately sexually assaulted a 15-year-old Donald Voorhees, who was also the son of a fellow JC's member. Gacy persuaded Donald to have sex with him, convincing him that basically in order to eventually have sex with women, you had to first have sex with a man, and Gacy would show him what to do. So Gacy, I believe, abused him for months, and he did the same with quite a few other teens at the time, and he actually encouraged one to have sex with his wife and then blackmailed the young boy and basically said, if you don't have sex with me, I'm going to tell the community that you had an affair with my wife. In 1968, Voorhees then reported what had happened with Gacy to his father, and at this point his father informed the police, and Gacy was then arrested and charged. Later that year, Gacy was also ordered to undergo a psychiatric evaluation, and it was at this time that he was diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder. Now, I did speak about this with the last murder we did, Paris Bennett. And antisocial personality disorder is the closest thing that you can have a diagnosis to in terms of psychopathy. November 1968, Gacy pleaded guilty to the charge in relation to Voorhees, because I think a few other boys had come forward, but he denied all those charges. He was then sentenced to 10 years in prison. On the same day, his wife actually petitioned for divorce and also gained sole custody of the couple's 2 children. He did not serve the 10 years. I think for good behaviour he was released after 18 months, which I found quite odd, because I know that with especially 10-year sentences, you're supposed to serve at least 3/4 of that sentence, but he barely served, he didn't even serve 2 years. So obviously his behaviour must have been absolutely brilliant. On his release, the conditions of his release included that Gacy relocate to Chicago and that he live with his mother with a 10 p.m. curfew. At this time, Gacy's mum bought Gacy a ranch home, and he resided at 8213 West Somerdale Avenue until his arrest in 1978. In August 1971, Gacy then became engaged to his second wife, Carol Huff. They had briefly dated in high school, so it was kind of like they had rekindled. They were then married July 1st, 1972, and Carol and her 2 daughters from a previous marriage moved into Gacy's home. So the start of 1975 was the beginning of Gacy's alter ego, Pogo the Clown, and this is why he was nicknamed the Killer Clown. So in 1975, Gacy created the character Pogo the Clown and used this to support himself financially, but it didn't actually bring him much money because he would often dress as Pogo at charity events, kids' parties, things within the community. Like I said, he was very well liked by the community, and no one suspected him to be a paedophile at this point. Yes, like I say, he wore the costume at charity events and parties, and he was later nicknamed the Killer Clown due to the charges that we'll talk about later. During this time, Gacy was also heavily involved in politics, and he landed clearance with the US Secret Service. I'm not really sure what that was in relation to. That was just something that came up when I was doing my research. But he's obviously a very smart man because he did become engaged in the community. He was very active in a lot of things to do with the community. Shortly after this time, that's when the murders of his victims first began, with his first victim being 15-year-old Tim McCoy. He allegedly, however, killed McCoy in self-defense, but again, McCoy was only 15 years old and no one believed him. Also, while working as a clown, he was also employed by PDM contractors, and at this time they also hired teenage boys. In May of that year, Gacy hired 15-year-old Anthony Antonucci, and after 2 months, he then went to visit the young boy because he had broken his leg, so he was trying to be the caring employer. He went to visit the boy in the house, and they both had quite a bit of alcohol, and it was at this point that Gacy had then managed to wrestle the boy to the floor and handcuffed him. However, he didn't actually do this properly, and the boy managed to get out the handcuffs, and he was also a high school wrestler, so he managed to in return wrestle Gacy to the ground and handcuff Gacy. I don't know how Gacy got free. I don't know if they agreed that like Gacy would just leave and he would free Gacy, but I'm guessing that's how he got freed. So now we're going to go on to the victims of Gacy and the murders. After his first victim, McCoy, Gacy then murdered his co-worker, John Butkovich. And after years of killing with a total of 33 victims, Gacy was apprehended in Des Plaines following the disappearance of a 15-year-old named Robert Peast. Police obtained a search warrant for Gacy's home and discovered a very powerful, foul-smelling odour, and they also found items belonging to the missing teens at this point. They also obtained a second search warrant to then go and target the crawl space underneath the house. I'm not sure why they needed a second warrant for that, but they got one. And they decided to rip up the floorboards and dug into the soil under the crawl space. And during the search, police actually did find human remains that were buried in the soil of the crawl space. And at this point, they then placed Gacy under arrest. So Gacy admitted to 25 to 30 murders in the 1970s, and the remains of a total of 29 people were found under his crawl space. The remaining victims were found in the Des Plaines River. So I think that once Gacy had killed them, he would then just dump their bodies. And the remaining victims were found in the Des Plaines River. I've just said that, I'm sorry. It's been one of those days. During his trial, Gacy told prosecutors of an alter ego called Jack, who was actually responsible for these crimes. However, after a psychiatric evaluation, this was proved to be false. Gacy is also known to have raped two males the same age, one in 1968 and one in 1978, and that he left them alive. And in May 1994, he was executed, and his last words were, "Kiss my ass." Now, during this time, I need to go back a few pages because I kind of got the dates mixed up. But when he was released after his, the 10-year sentence, and he only served 18 months. So after this, he actually did get a few more charges for sexual assault and rape. So he was charged, like I said, with minor charges. In 1971, he was charged with sexually assaulting a teen boy. The boy claimed he had been lured to Gacy's car at the Greyhound bus terminal, and Gacy had then drove the boy to Gacy's house and attempted to have sex with him. This claim was, however, unfortunately dismissed because the boy failed to appear in court, and that's just unfortunate. June 22nd of the same year, Gacy was then arrested and charged with aggravated sexual battery. However, the complaint was filed by a young boy. However, the charges were dropped when the boy was found to be trying to blackmail Gacy. So at this time, he had racked up a few more charges, but nothing came of it, just because of little things like, obviously one didn't show up to court. He might have been a bit scared of Gacy, but also another boy had tried to blackmail him, and so the charges were then dropped. So for his MO, Gacy would often pick up, by his own admission, white male runaways or prostitutes, kind of mid to late teens. He would offer them money and jobs in exchange for sex. And at this time, he would then handcuff them and knock them out with chloroform or too much alcohol. He was also known to torture his victims before he killed them, and he did this by using a hot fire poker, hot candle wax, and repeated drowning. And it is believed that to show dominance, he would urinate on his victims, and then he would rape them before and after he had murdered them. And this is where the necrophilia comes into it. He would then keep the bodies around for like a day or two, and then he would either bury them under his home in the crawl space, or he would put them in the river. He often killed his victims by strangulation and then buried the victims under the crawl space. However, his first victim was killed in a different way. The first victim, the 15-year-old, was stabbed around 4 times in the chest. Unfortunately, he died. And as I said, for the psychology of Gacy, he did have antisocial personality disorder. He showed little remorse, little guilt. He was emotionally unstable, and like I said, this is the closest that you can be diagnosed to being a psychopath. So let's go through his known victims and the disappearances that he was later charged with. So January 3rd, 1972, his first victim was Tim McCoy, 15, who was stabbed 4 times. January 1974, it was an unidentified victim between the ages of 14 and 18, and they were strangled. July 29th, 1975, John Butkovich, 17, who was strangled. 1976, so April 6th, Donnell Sampson, who was 18, was raped, tortured, and strangled. May 14th, Randall Riffett, who was 15, who was gagged with like a cloth or something, and he asphyxiated on this and died. June 3rd, Michael Benson, who was 17. June 13th was William Carroll, who was 16, who was raped and strangled. August 6th was Rick Johnson, who was 17 and strangled. October 24th was an unidentified male, but he was assumed to be around 14 years old. October 26th, Kenneth Parker, who was 16, and he was strangled. So you're seeing the pattern, a lot of strangulation, which is quite personal. October 26th, William Bundy, who was 19. December 12th, Gregory Gottschalk, who was 17. Now, moving on to the disappearances, which I believe they found the bodies of the disappeared men, or the men who disappeared, or the boys who disappeared. I don't think he admitted to these. So January 20th, 1977 was John Sick, who was 19. March 15th, John Prestige, who was 20. July 5th, Matthew Duncan, who was 19 and he was strangled. September 15th, Robert Gilroy, 18. September 25th, John Morey, 19. October 17th, Russell Nelson, 21. November 10th, Robert Winch, 16. November 18th, Tommy Bowling, 20. December 9th, David Talsma, 19. Then we're moving on to 1978. February 16th, William, I can't read the last name, 19. May 22nd, Jeffrey Ringel, 25 to 26 years old. June, Tim O'Rourke, who was 20. November 4th, Frank Logadin, who was 19. November 24th was James Mazzora, who was 21. And his final victim was Robert Piest, who was just 15. And that is the story of John Wayne Gacy. And the thing is, like, he was well known to police for rape and sexual assault and sexual aggravated battery. And so, like, yeah, he did originally get 10 years for the JCs, the young boy with the JCs. But he only served 18 months, which I just don't get how that's possible. But even after that, he did continue to get complaints of rape or sexual battery, and the police just dropped the charges on such silly things. I mean, perhaps if the police had actually done anything about it, he may not have been out to commit these crimes, but we'll never know, unfortunately. But if this is the sort of thing you like, I'm here every Wednesday to talk through the psychology of killers. And so if you also have any cases you'd like me to look into, definitely leave a comment down below. And if this is the kind of content you like, I'm here every Wednesday and I'm here every Saturday for Saturday's Haunting Hour. So definitely go and click that subscribe button.